Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. We're also on BitChute, a Speaking Podcast, and YouTube. I also have the Awakening Podcast, the Learn Polish Podcast, and the Meditation Podcast, and all can be found on roycollin.com. Today, my guest, coming from the USA, Texas, near Texas, I believe, please welcome Elizabeth Meyers.
Thank you so much for having me on my show today. It's a delight to be here.
No, great to have you. So I always like to ask my guests to please tell the listeners who's Elizabeth.
Yes. So I'm a wife and a mother. We have 8 kids. My husband and I've been married for 25 years. So we have 4 boys and 4 girls. So always something going on. I like the title Chaos Coordinator. But my husband's been in the U.S. Air Force for the past 30-ish years. And so he's in the process right now of retiring. So we've moved back to Texas, which is where I'm from originally. And we're out kind of in the country. So we're adding chickens and sheep and all kinds of fun animals. And so we're having a good time. I'm an author and a speaker. And so I just kind of wanted to share my story about that today to encourage others.
Excellent. Yeah. So, I mean, you're a speaker, so we'll kind of get into the speaking part anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I always like to know the person's journey to get into
Mm-hmm.
speaking when you were younger, that
Mm-hmm.
how it was for you.
Yeah, I've always been a reader and a writer. I've never really considered myself a speaker. And as I've gotten into the world of writing books and speaking, I realized there's kind of 2 flavors. It's either writers who also speak or speakers who also write a book to go with it. Most people kind of tend to fall into one camp or the other. So I've always been a really strong introverted person. You know, I don't want to be out in front. I would just kind of like to hide behind the book or the keyboard, and I would rather do it that way. I remember as a child learning about Emily Dickinson and how she wrote all this poetry throughout her life, but nobody knew she was doing it. And it wasn't until after she died that she became famous. And I'm like, that's the way to do it right there. Just do your thing, but nobody knows about it till after you're gone. But I wrote this book, which has a very powerful message for me. And the reason why I wrote it was to help others who I went through a period of struggling with depression and anxiety following the loss of my son. And so I wanted to share some things that I learned about that. And my whole driving force has been, I want to help other people. And so as I focused on that, I realized that adding speaking to it would be better for the other people. And so that helped me to overcome my fear of public speaking and of talking about things, because when I focus on helping others rather than focusing on my discomfort or what are people going to think of me, then the fear just goes away. It's not about how I look or what people might think. It's about how can I help other people. So that was kind of the message that I wanted to share with people today who are, trying to speak or maybe trying to overcome a fear of public speaking. Is our focus makes a big difference. And I had 2 different examples of where that happened when my book first came out in 2017. I was very happy to have that accomplished, but I was like, nobody asked me about my book because I couldn't even do like the little elevator pitch, in conversation. It's like, I know what I wrote, but I can't describe it quickly. But I got asked, it was 2 weekends right in a row. So one weekend I was at an author's conference where my book was up for an award, and we had to give a 90-second speech on it. And then the next weekend I had been invited by a church to do like a women's retreat for like there were 4 longer talks over the whole weekend. And you would think that bigger one would be more intimidating, right? You think I'd have more fear over that. But it was the 90-second spiel where I totally fell apart, and I totally had an anxiety attack because I felt like the pressure was on me. I was thinking about, how am I going to come across? How am I going to look? Am I going to win this award? And it was all about myself. And I totally buckled under the pressure. But then the following week, I went and I did this retreat, and it wasn't about me or how I looked at all. I was just very authentic and vulnerable. And I'm like, hey, I'm messed up, and this is how I deal with it. And my focus was on helping these other women that were there. And it was so rewarding and so fulfilling. And that contrast of those 2 weekends back to back just really cemented for me what public speaking is about. It's not about me. It's about helping other people.
I always feel if the mission is important, the fear
Mhm.
disappears.
Yes, exactly.
So I know you've done some keynotes as well. So you might just kind of tell us how you prepare yourself, what your for keynote as well as just
Hmm.
any speech that you're doing.
Hmm. Well, it depends on kind of, I mean, you start with the topic of like, what's my point? And I tend to, my tendency is to cram too much into one. And some early like videos that I made for speaking, things that people had asked me to do, they're like, give us a 15-minute talk about XYZ. And, I tried to cram 2 hours worth of content into 15 minutes. And I think, oh, well, I'm over delivering, but it's actually not good. People can't digest that much information. So for me, I need to start with what's my one main point I want to, I just need to start with a thesis sentence of what is the main goal of what I want to say. And sometimes narrowing that down is the hardest part. When it's a big topic, like say, I talk a lot about mindset, if it's, I mean, there are so many things I could go on for days about that. But, if I just want to narrow it down to one little part about that. So for me, I think narrowing down and focusing in is the hard part, and that's where I start. And then I've learned the value of outlines. When I was a young writer, even in high school, I would just write. They'd always make us turn in an outline of our paper before we did the paper, and I'm like, I can't give you an outline now. I don't know what I'm going to say yet. I just wanted to sit down and write. And that would work okay with an essay. But if you're doing a speech or a book, you need an outline first. And I try to just stick with the threes, hit three things, say, have an intro, three things, a conclusion is just a really good, seems like people can hold on to three things, because your desire is to teach them something and have them walk away and be able to apply that. If you throw so much information at them that they walk away going, that was great, but now what do I do? Then, have we really served them well? So I think, the one main point and then the three or the one thesis and then the three main points is just a really good general outline. And I have to kind of narrow it down to that and cut out everything else, which is hard to do because I feel like I have a lot of great things to say.
Very good. And how many books have you? Have you more than one?
My second one is coming out later this year. It's at the editors right now, so I'm waiting for them to give it back to me so that I can make changes. And then the third one is already in progress.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. And, yeah, you'll keep going, I presume. Yeah, there'll be more and more. You're after getting
Yeah.
the fight for writing the books.
I have so many ideas. The problem is time to execute them.
And like you mentioned the retreat, did you actually ever organize a retreat yourself, or is it that you just went to retreats for kind of say in the
I went to one as the speaker that someone else organized. I do want to get into, organizing my own events. Eventually that's where I'm headed. Of course, in this past year and a half or so with COVID, a lot of in-person things have been canceled. So most of my speaking here recently has been virtual or podcasts. And it's in doing a lot of podcasts and having that repetition of just talking to people, being forced to talk to people about my book that, that's helped me with that elevator pitch kind of a thing. And recently I was just having lunch with some people about totally unrelated topic, but they're like, so tell me about your book. And I was like, oh, and I jumped right in and, just gave them a short little spiel. And then I realized, oh, I can do that now because I've practiced on podcasts. Whereas before that was such an intimidating question when somebody say, what's your book about? So I think it's important too for authors or for people who consider themselves primarily writers or introverts who want to hide behind the keyboard. It's important to come out from behind that because a lot of people today, the way people want to consume information is video or auditory. Podcasts are great because you can do it on the go. You can listen to them in your car. You can do it while you're folding laundry. You can listen to it at 2x speed and do it half the time. That's what our family does.
I constantly do that. I'm like, yeah. Oh, and even on YouTube as well. I wish I could do by three. You can on some podcasts. You can do. I think on Spotify you can do by three. But yeah,
oh well,
yeah. It's weird that your brain can actually understand it. And if you change it back to normal, it feels like they're talking like this. And you're like, that's why I think I get so much done by, when I'm researching, I'm always by two at least.
Yeah. My husband was actually the one who started that because his mind, he's a fighter pilot by trade. So his mind just works really fast naturally. But now all of our kids can do it too. They can listen to anything on 2 times speed and keep up with it and understand the content. So I think that's part of serving our audience, is going, how do they want to consume the information I want to share? And so a book is great. I love to read books, but some people don't want to sit down and read a book. They'd rather watch a short video, or they want to hear a podcast, or they want to hear you say a speech in person, or hear you, at a retreat or at a conference. And so I think the more ways that we can package our message and deliver it, the greater we can serve our audience to give it to them the way that they need to hear it. As a homeschool mom, I'm always trying to find, okay, it's not enough that I know it or that I can teach it, but I need to know, how will they receive it? And so I think just, concentrating on our audience and what they need from us really just helps us to get the focus off of ourselves and off of little things that don't matter much. I'm sure you've been to a thing where you saw a speaker who maybe wasn't so polished, or maybe they were difficult to understand, or what, but their content was so fascinating and what they had to share was so important that it didn't matter. Yes. I know one time years ago, I heard he was actually a fighter pilot from Russia who had just hopped in his jet and defected to America and he was, as a speaker, he was very difficult to understand. His accent was very, very thick, but I was just spellbound, I was just, because the story was so fascinating. And so I think when we focus on our message and on the importance of what we have to share, then those other things that don't matter as much, can fall away. Of course, we want to work on our delivery, and of course we want to, improve in that area, but let's keep the main things and think about, how do we serve the people who are listening?
Absolutely. And I think some people are too polished, but they're not polished with what they're saying. And
right.
I would definitely prefer the person with the message. That always the message is the most important thing. So I know you do some live stuff as well, yeah. Because I read that your kids are helping you with the technical side. Like, is it StreamYard and some other ones? So you might tell us what you've learned on that and kind of some tricks on that. Because I do a live call every week as well with 5 other podcasters. So I think it's interesting for people to get some tips on that one.
Yeah, definitely. So it was just over a year ago, I started trying to get onto more podcasts to talk about my book and share that with other people. And in doing that, I kind of realized, I'm like, oh, I could kind of do this, and I saw that it doesn't have to be as complicated as I was trying to make it be, because I always wanted to do a podcast someday in the future. But doing it live on StreamYard and just broadcasting live to Facebook and to YouTube simultaneously was a really neat way for me to get started. I'm a perfectionist, and I knew that if I let myself edit it, I would spend too much time. I just need to publish it as is. And people really want more real, authentic content anyway. They don't necessarily want the super highly edited, polished video all the time. Sometimes they just like to see real people sitting down and talking. So StreamYard was super easy to use. And I started with Anchor as a podcast thing, which was free and super simple. And it was kind of just an experiment at first, but I really loved it. As an introvert, we have a short introduction, and then we jump into the meat of meaningful conversations. My podcast is Resilient Life Hacks. So it's about, resiliency of overcoming. So I listen to these people who have fascinating stories of what they've overcome, and they share what they've learned with us. And I realized, as an introvert, I don't like small talk. I don't like chit chat, like you would do at a party where you don't know many people or whatever. But I love these conversations where we can just dig in right away. And so it's grown. So now I've gotten to the point where I do want to do some editing. One situation I had with live calls was occasionally something would happen and the person wouldn't show up. And then I was kind of like, now what do I say? So I realized the benefit of being able to edit and schedule out in advance, but I still think those live things that's what people enjoy watching. It's kind of like reality TV, you just get to see what's happening live in somebody else's world, and people enjoy that. So yeah, I definitely recommend StreamYard, or I know there's other ones like it. That's just the one that I used, but
yeah, that's the
it
one
was really good.
And do you actually engage with the listeners as well, or do you just focus on your guest?
I just primarily focused on the guest. There were comments coming in on Facebook, but I can't do both real time. I can't focus on my guest and respond to comments. So after it concluded, I would go back through and respond to the comments. I know I've been a part of other live things where they have one person who's kind of the face and another person kind of behind the scenes who's doing the comments and things. or, you can show some of those on the screen. I just don't have the bandwidth in my brain to do both at the same time.
Yeah, but I think you lose the flow anyway, because what we have
Yeah.
is, because we've five, one person is kind of concentrating on that, and it allows us to kind of stay present with the speaker and make sure if he's saying something that we can interject and everything. But
Right.
yeah, if you're on your own, you can't be, because
Yeah.
people think you can multitask, but no, not like that.
No, you can't really. And I just chose to focus on the conversation, because I'm a one-woman show. I do it all myself. I do all my own graphics, all my own editing. I can't afford like a helper yet. So
Yeah,
I got to stick with
I
what
do
I can
all
do.
the editing. That's why with the video, I just put the video out, because
Yep.
like I do one weekly show on the Awakening podcast with a guy. He does all the video editing, because we include kind of things that we've discussed. I haven't a clue how to do that, but I can edit the audio. But it takes time. I mean, I don't know, do people realize, especially if you want to go through it in detail. That's why, not too long a podcast, like an hour or less. Whereas sometimes when we're doing the live ones, they're over 2 hours. And, if you want to go back, and because the quality of sound, I believe it's worth putting the effort into, the sound. Because if someone's listening on a good sound system, they don't want to be hearing the lip smacking. They don't want to be hearing the, the breaths, and
Yes.
there's some, or long pauses and different things. And if you can improve that, it's just, you're making it better for them. But like I was discussing it with the guy that I do it weekly with, about all, because I have a load in the back line, but they're all about 2 hours. And we kind of said the message is more important. So for them, because that, as they can take double that time to edit it. So it can be 4 hours. So, your day is gone when you're editing. And
Yeah. And I would encourage people who are just starting out to just jump in, because I tend to want to wait till I can get everything just perfect, or I know everything, and then get it. But then you're wasting time where people aren't hearing the good stuff you have to share. So, like I said, I jumped in with what was easy. And, now I've started season 2 now. And so I've made some improvements. I've learned some new things. I have some new software. And it's still not where I would like it to be ideally, but I'm learning and I'm growing. And so I say, just, jump in where you are, and you look at anything online. If you can go back far enough into their archives, if they haven't deleted it or hidden it, you can see everybody starts somewhere and they improve. If you go back to somebody that you admire, respect, and go look at their earlier videos, everybody improves, and everybody's got to start somewhere. So I would say jump in and learn as you go.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, because I've listened to some of my I think I've about 90 odd of the speaking podcasts. But I started in 2018, and when I went back and listened to them, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But just simple things. Then you start getting the green screen, the ring light, and different things, and it just.
Right.
And I think the only way you learn it is by doing it, and then you pay more attention to others, or as like I've been a guest on other shows as well. And you just kind of pick up things as you go along. And I think if you're trying to be a perfectionist, it's not the way to go. Just get there, just start, and then adjust.
I liken it as to, you don't wait until every light turns green before you back out of your driveway. You just start your trip, and when you hit a red light, you deal with it, and you keep going. And so you can't sit in your house and wait for every light to turn green before you start sharing the message that God's given you to share with the world. The reason why you're here on this planet. We just need to jump in and start and go from where we are and learn along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Are you doing, because I made some note of video teaching and course video. Are you teaching people how to create courses on video?
Well, I have a course out based on my first book, and I'm working on the one for my second book. But I have like a little mini sort of get started the easy way with a podcast course. So I have a couple people who I've helped out get started on theirs. So that's kind of just in the beginning phases of development. But I have helped, as soon as I started podcasting, then I had a bunch of people come to me and go, well, how did you do that? And, so I've kind of just developed some resources to help people who are wanting to get started.
No, I'm the same. I'm after helping a lot of people, so I've created a course, but I haven't released it yet. But yeah, I'm just trying to do it step by step, because there's, even putting stuff onto Anchor, just getting the graphics, the whole lot. There is a few things, and it's nice for somebody to kind of guide you in it, because I think I read about 8 books at the start before and I mean, I know that there's a load of things that they weren't covering, especially the marketing. I think a lot of them, they fall short of the marketing, and that's the most important thing, because you could have the best podcast in the world, and if there's nobody listening to you,
Yeah.
so and I don't know why, but they don't concentrate, and I've actually, I'm halfway through a book on that, showing that the marketing is the most important thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm needing to get into next. Now that I've kind of started to figure out the nuts and bolts, I need to go, okay, how do I get more people to listen to this? And then, how can I monetize this a little more to cover my expenses?
Like, you're based in the States, so I know that the Anchor allows you to have the sponsor, but they don't allow, because I have 4 podcasts, but 3 are with Anchor, but they don't allow the sponsorship in Europe. I don't know why, because they'd actually be,
Really?
yeah, they'd be making funds from it as well. But yeah, unfortunately not. But it is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
So when you're kind of helping people overcome like the fear and everything, what kind of tips are you giving them that they can, because there is people terrifiedly, they're as you, I mean, I've been through it myself, you've been through it, so it's great to actually help people to do it. So I'm just curious how you're actually
Yeah.
helping people.
So I kind of approach things from a Christian worldview. My book is a faith-based book, but to me, it's just, God's given you something and he wants us to share it. The kind of the message that I've gotten is, God blesses us not just to bless us, but so that we'll be a blessing to others and to share those things. And kind of the little nudge from God that I felt is, don't hoard it. I've blessed you. I've helped you overcome your depression and your anxiety and your grief and all these things that you were stuck in. Now go help others, with their difficulties and their challenges. And so that really just inspires me when I feel like it's a purpose and it's a mission, and it's like a life thing. And for me too, because my writing and speaking was born out of a really painful time in my life, it feels like it redeems that pain. It brings me, my son was he died in the second trimester of pregnancy, so he died before he was born. Very, very brief life. But when I help others through their pain because of what I learned in the aftermath of his death, I feel like that brings more meaning and more purpose to his life, and it kind of redeems all the pain and all those years of grief and being stuck that I went through. It brings meaning to those and purpose. And when I focus on that, then there's just no room for fear. It's like fear seems silly. It's just, there's something so much bigger than that. There's a bigger purpose in everything that I'm doing, that is like, why be afraid? That's just kind of ridiculous. And I think a lot of our fear comes from our own insecurities about ourselves. And I think people don't think about us as much as we think they do. Everybody's thinking about themselves.
Absolutely.
And so, I think if we just realize that and go, people aren't nearly as critical of us as we are of ourselves. I don't know if you've ever like looked at a picture, with a group of people, and you think, oh, my hair looks bad in that, or something. Like, you're focused on yourself, and then somebody else will go, oh, my shirt is weird, or my arm looks fat, or what, and you're like, I didn't even notice that. Everybody's focused on how they look in that picture. And so really, people aren't thinking anything of you at all, really. I mean, it feels like that when you're up on stage or you're the one speaking and you feel like, oh, everybody's looking at me and they're judging me or whatever. But hopefully people will be listening to the content. And if that is meaningful, if that's impactful, if that's what they need right then in that moment, then it doesn't matter what you're wearing, or if you tripped over a word, or if you forgot what you were going to say, or, whatever. It's more about the content. It's about the message and the purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing. And so I just think having that big why behind it, that big sense of purpose, is just so helpful. It just shrinks the fear.
Absolutely. And I think we definitely overanalyze it. And if you record it, you'll be beating yourself up going, oh, I did this. But if you
Yeah.
watch it back, you'll be like, it wasn't that bad. And then people will be coming up complimenting you, and you're like, and you're the worst critic. And it's the first thing is just get out of that. Just forget about that. As you say, make sure if you're speaking, make sure it's something important, and that you're trying to, the pain that you went through, the fact that you're now, with the book and the speeches, to help somebody that has just recently gone through it. That can be a huge difference to them. That's what they need. That's the helping hand. And you can change so many lives, not just by the book, by actually just hearing your words. that they can resonate with you. And I think, it's so important to find something that that you've overcome and share it with others. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I think often the biggest pain or grief in our life is often where we are able to serve the most, where we're able to help others. And if we can, heal and recover from that pain and then go back and kind of mine that for, what gold nuggets were hidden there amongst the rubble that happened when that thing happened. That we really have something to bring forward to other people. And so I think it also, like I said, it puts that painful time in perspective because something good can come out of it and other people can be helped.
No, absolutely. And are you still a blogger? I see that you were done as a blogger. Are you still blogging?
So recently, since I started the podcast, it's kind of switched over to podcasting. So my recent blog posts are they're paired with the podcast. I'm trying to kind of get the most mileage out of each interview that I do. So, I upload the podcast to a podcast site, but I also put the video of it on YouTube. So I have those there. And then, I make social media clips and things from it. So that goes all over. And then I have a blog post that goes with it. So I have tons of ideas of things I would love to blog about that kind of complements what my books are about. But I'm a one-woman show and, I have 8 kids and like 20 animals. So
20 animals. Oh
there's
my
just
God.
not time.
Wow. So like, just finally, because you're homeschooling, and I know we're in crazy times. You're in Texas, so I think that's one of the better states where you don't have to be kind of, masking yourself up and everything. But like homeschooling, because some people now have actually had to resort to that, whether the schools have shut down or they don't want to send their children into a school where they have to wear a mask, which I totally don't agree with, because it's dangerous. But so what kind of tips could you give people for the homeschooling? Because obviously with 8 children, it's hard, but you're focused, you're doing podcasting, you're writing books. So, you're well focused, which is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very grateful that we were already homeschooling before the pandemic, because I know it has been a really tumultuous couple of years for children and even young adults in school. And that's just really hard to have that thrust upon you. We had years of prayer and preparation before we started, and lots of training. We just this past week, my husband and I went to 2 different homeschool conferences and kind of got filled up, got some training, got reminded of why we're doing what we're doing, got new fresh ideas, and people who are just suddenly thrust into that situation they didn't have the time to have all that equipping, and their lives weren't necessarily structured to accommodate that, especially in a situation like where you have both parents working and now suddenly kids are at home. And of course, a lot of people were working from home. So it's just a real challenge. But I think, again, it's focusing on the kids and on what they need. And especially, in this trying time, it's challenging for them. What they need from us may not be a math lesson that day. They may need, just encouragement or love, or to be reassured that things are going to be okay, or that, their family is going to be okay. And one thing that was really powerful to me that I read about early on in homeschooling that always encouraged me when I had a bad day of homeschooling was from a mom who had several young children, and she was pregnant and was on bed rest because of some complication that she had with the pregnancy. And so that whole school year, the only thing that she did with her children was read alouds. She read aloud to her children, and they did standardized testing at the end of every year. And so that year, all of her kids improved in spelling, in math, in all the things, even though they hadn't done any of those subjects. And again, at this homeschool conference I was just at, I was reminded of how valuable reading to your children is, especially even after they're already reading on their own. I think we have a tendency to go, oh, the kid can read for himself. Here's a book, go and do your thing. But you can read aloud to them at a much higher level than they're able to comprehend if they can read to themselves only. And so it's just so valuable for formation of languages and ideas, and it's really just like good vegetables for the brain, and good books. There are some junk food books out there, but I think I would, if I could only do one thing, that's what I would focus on. And I know early on in my homeschool journey, I was too focused again on being that perfectionist person, getting everything right and hitting every subject. And really, homeschooling is more about giving your kids a love of learning and a love of reading, teaching them how to learn on their own. Because nobody's ever going to know everything you need to know in life, right? I mean, we were just talking about speaking and podcasting and how you figure things out on your own. So what's more important than hitting every subject or knowing every detail or date or whatever is knowing how to learn what you need to know to do what it is you're called to do. So I think if we kind of just step back and take a breath and take a bigger picture approach to what are we trying to do with our kids, and it's not necessarily get through every page of every workbook, then that takes the pressure off in my mind anyway. It does for me anyway, at least. So, and I don't know, I haven't had to mess with all the like virtual school and checking in and all that. So I can't really speak to that part because I'm their teacher. So I decide what lessons they're doing and things. So it's a little bit of a different animal, but it is challenging, but it's definitely worth it. And we love being together as a family. And I know it can be hard sometimes when everybody's used to going their own ways and now suddenly you're all thrust together and stuck in your house together. But it really does help build character and build relationships. In a family with 10 people, we have 10 different personalities. We learn, our kids learn early how to share, how to get along with different personality types, how to interact with one another, how to forgive, how to say, I'm sorry. That just goes with all of us being in the same house together every day.
No, brilliant. And when you're reading to them, I suppose it's like what we said at the start with the by two, that you read to them by four, so that you're able to read 4 times the amount of books that.
Yeah, so I turned out to be a really fast reader because my oldest, when he was little, was impatient, and I would try to read him a book and he would turn the pages for me, and I would try to finish the page before he turned it. And so I got to just be a really fast read aloud person. And then later on, I was reading to the kids. They're like, Mom, you're reading too fast. Slow down. I'm like, I'm sorry. Your big brother trained me this way. This is the only the only way I know how to read aloud.
And would you get the elder kids then to be kind of trying to teach the younger kids? Because sometimes, by mentoring or by just being the teacher, you actually learn something better. You don't realize it, whether it's speaking or whatever.
Yes, that's very true. And yeah, our older kids have always helped our youngers a lot. My youngest is 9 now, so they're all a little bit more independent. But I know when we had little biddies around and I was trying to just not lose anybody, our oldest child would be responsible for the youngest, and then the second oldest would be responsible for the second youngest, and so on, until you get to the middle of the family and you have 2 that are pretty close in age, and they never liked holding hands and being buddies. But it kept everybody together. I never lost anybody for any long period of time.
Listen, that's fantastic advice. And I personally believe that it's a better system because I'm seeing a lot of flaws in the education system with the schools, and people just pass their child into the education system and they don't even ask the children what they're doing. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it's more memory, and it's not actually the different learning techniques, and just so I think the homeschooling it is definitely difficult, but I commend you on that.
Yeah, we focus on learning how to learn and learning how to think. Sometimes we get into just a rote, I did not realize until I was homeschooling my children that there's more than one way to do every math problem. I was taught one way to do it and I just thought that's it, and you do it that way and you move on. But it's actually my kids taught me. My older son, he was really intuitively good at math, but he was allergic to a pencil. He did not want to write things down, and he would write the answer to his math problem. And I'm like, you can't do that without showing all your work. I'm like, I cannot do that problem in my head. How? You need to show me your work. I don't believe that you got this answer. And he's like, oh, well, this is close to that number. And then you take this away and then you add that number back in later. And then you figure that. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right. That makes sense. I didn't know there was another way to do that problem, but you figured it out. So I've learned so much as a homeschool mom, going back through everything again, and also learning in a different way. We teach history as a story, not as a list of dates and facts to remember. And it's so fascinating that way.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I was talking to somebody today about that in history, and I was like the worst in my class for 13 to 15. Because it was facts. He was making you learn facts, repeat facts. What year did it? And he just shouting at you, barking orders. Whereas the next teacher that I had was telling stories, making us, that we were part of the story, and I was getting top marks in it. And so it's the most important thing. The stories, people remember stories. Same in speech. When you're making a speech, if it's a story, I'll remember the story. Whereas sometimes people are going to just throwing bullet points at you. And it's like,
Yeah. I mention that to all my guests when I have them on my podcast. I say, start with your story, because that's what draws people in. And then, we'll naturally move to the point of, okay, this is what you learned when you overcame your difficulty. How can other people apply this to their lives? Because I want them to walk away with something actionable. I don't want them to just be entertained only. But we use that story initially to draw them in. We don't start with, okay, here's what you need to do to get your life straight. They tell about what they've been through and how they overcame. And that's where people connect.
Elizabeth, it's been wonderful talking to you. Really appreciate your time. So how can people get in contact with you?
My website is just my name, elizabethmeyers.me, M-E. And that's kind of the hub for everything that I do. That's where the blog is. You can connect to the podcast from there. The podcast also has its own site, resilientlifehacks.com. But you can connect to all the social media there. On most platforms, I'm at the Liz Meyers, for like Facebook and Instagram and that sort of thing, where I post different things in different places. But the website is the place to kind of go to get all the information. And I have several free downloads there that I offer for people, so that you can get connected and you can find out, the top 20 resilient life hacks, or, 5 roads to resiliency that I have. I have a bunch of different things. So people can check that out and see what would be helpful to them.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll put all the links in the podcast description and the video. So thank you very much, Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com, on BitChute, or on YouTube. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating, a thumbs up, share with your friends. Until next week, take care.